Imagine stepping out into the harsh Montana winter, only to discover a magnificent wild Mustang collapsed in your field, its body trembling from illness and cold. For retired Marine Tom Reeves, what began as a simple act of compassion would unravel into something far more extraordinary than he could have ever imagined. The horse he found that day wasn't just fighting for survival. It carried a secret that would shake the very foundation of wild horse conservation in America. What starts as a rescue mission quickly transforms into a journey of healing, not just for the Mustang, but for a battle-worn veteran who thought he'd left his purpose behind on distant shores. Stay with us to witness how one man's decision to save a dying horse leads to a discovery that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about America's wild Mustangs. The sprawling plains of western Montana stretched endlessly before Tom Reeves' modest ranch, a place where the wind howled through ancient pines and the silence was broken only by the occasional cry of a distant eagle. At 52, Tom had chosen this remote corner of the world for a reason: to escape the echoes of his past that still haunted his dreams. After 25 years in the Marine Corps, including 4 tours that had left their mark both physically and mentally, he had searched for a place where the memories might finally fade into the landscape. The ranch had been nothing more than a run-down property when he'd purchased it 3 years ago, its fences broken and its buildings wearing the weight of neglect. But Tom had always been good with his hands, and the endless tasks of restoration had given him something to focus on besides the nightmares that still visited him in the dark hours of the morning. He'd rebuilt the old barn board by board, mended the fences that stretched across his 100 acres, and slowly breathed life back into the forgotten corner of Montana he now called home. That morning had started like any other in the depths of winter. The thermometer outside his kitchen window had registered well below 0, and the sky hung heavy with the promise of more snow. Tom had pulled on his heavy winter coat, wrapped a thick scarf around his neck, and stepped out into the biting cold to begin his daily routine of checking the property. The sun was just beginning to peek over the eastern horizon, casting long shadows across the pristine blanket of snow that had fallen during the night. He'd been making his way along the eastern fence line, checking for any damage from the recent storm, when something caught his eye in the distance. At first, he thought it might have been a fallen tree branch, dark against the endless white of the snow-covered field. But as he squinted through the early morning light, something about the shape seemed wrong. Tom's military training kicked in. The instinct that had kept him alive through countless patrols told him something was out of place. Moving closer, his boots crunching through the fresh powder, Tom felt his heart begin to race as the shape began to take form. It wasn't a fallen branch at all. It was a horse, and not just any horse. Even collapsed in the snow, there was no mistaking the proud lines and wild beauty of a Mustang. The horse's coat, a deep chocolate brown with hints of copper that caught the early morning light, was covered in a layer of frost, and its breathing was shallow and labored. Tom approached carefully, his years of experience with horses telling him that even a weakened wild Mustang could be dangerous. But as he drew closer, he realized the animal was in no condition to pose a threat. Its eyes were glazed with fever, and its body trembled with each shallow breath. The Mustang's flanks were sunken, speaking of days without proper food. And there was something about the way it lay there that spoke of complete exhaustion. Without hesitation, Tom pulled off his heavy coat and draped it over the horse's trembling body. The bitter cold bit through his shirt, but he barely noticed it as he assessed the situation. The Mustang was young, probably no more than 5 or 6 years old, and despite its current state, Tom could see the powerful muscles and proud bloodlines that spoke of its wild heritage. This was no ordinary horse. This was one of the legendary wild Mustangs that still roamed the most remote corners of the American West. Time was critical. Tom knew that in these temperatures, the horse wouldn't survive much longer without help. He pulled out his phone and quickly dialed his neighbor, Mike Henderson, who lived 3 miles down the road. Mike was one of the few people Tom had allowed himself to become friendly with since moving to Montana, and more importantly, he had a horse trailer. "Mike, it's Tom. I need your help. I've got a wild Mustang down in my east field. It's in bad shape. Can you bring your trailer?" The words came out in a rush of vapor in the frigid air. There was a pause on the other end of the line before Mike's voice crackled through. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. While he waited, Tom stayed with the Mustang, talking to it in low, soothing tones. The horse's eyes, though clouded with fever, seemed to track his movements, and Tom could sense an intelligence there that went beyond mere animal survival. There was something about this Mustang that called to him, something in its fierce will to live despite the odds stacked against it. The sound of Mike's truck approaching broke through the morning stillness. Tom could hear the crunch of tires on snow as his neighbor carefully maneuvered the vehicle and trailer across the field. As Mike stepped out of his truck, Tom could see the concern etched on his weathered face. "Good Lord," Mike breathed, taking in the scene before him. "Where did this one come from?" Together, they worked quickly but carefully to move the Mustang. It took all their strength to help the horse to its feet, its legs trembling with the effort. The animal was too weak to resist as they slowly guided it toward the trailer, supporting its weight between them. Tom could feel the heat radiating from the horse's body despite the freezing temperature, a sure sign of severe fever. Getting the Mustang into the trailer was a challenge, but somehow they managed it. As they secured the doors, Mike turned to Tom with a worried expression. "What are you planning to do with it? This isn't just any stray horse, Tom. This is a wild Mustang. There are regulations, procedures." Tom cut him off with a shake of his head. "Right now, all I'm planning to do is keep it alive. We can worry about the rest later." He meant it. Something deep inside him, perhaps the same instinct that had kept him and his fellow Marines alive in countless dangerous situations, told him that saving this horse was important. Not just for the animal's sake, but for reasons he couldn't yet understand. They carefully drove the trailer back to Tom's barn, which he had converted into a comfortable stable shortly after buying the property. It had seemed like an extravagance at the time, fixing up a barn when he owned no horses, but something had compelled him to do it. Now, as they slowly backed the trailer up to the barn doors, he was grateful for that impulse. The Mustang was barely conscious as they helped it into one of the stalls Tom had prepared. He had already laid down fresh straw and filled water buckets, his military efficiency taking over in the crisis. As they finally got the horse settled, Tom could see the full extent of its condition in the barn's bright lighting. The Mustang's coat, though beautiful, was marked with small scars and scrapes that spoke of a life in the wild. But it was the horse's eyes that caught and held Tom's attention. Even through the fever, there was a depth there that seemed to mirror something in his own soul. Mike helped him get the horse comfortable, then reluctantly headed home, extracting a promise from Tom to call if he needed anything else. Left alone with the Mustang, Tom began the task of trying to save its life. He knew enough about horses to recognize the symptoms of severe pneumonia, complicated by exposure and exhaustion. What he couldn't understand was how a wild Mustang had ended up alone and sick in his field, miles from where the wild herds usually roamed. As the morning wore on, Tom worked tirelessly to bring down the horse's fever. He used cool compresses on the Mustang's neck and chest, administered the antibiotics he kept in his well-stocked veterinary kit, and made sure fresh water was always within reach. The horse drifted in and out of consciousness, but each time its eyes opened, they seemed to focus on Tom with an intensity that stirred something deep within him. By midday, Tom had settled into a rhythm of care that reminded him of long nights watching over wounded comrades. The comparisons surprised him. He hadn't thought about those times in years, had tried his best to lock away the memories of battlefield medicine and the weight of responsibility for others' lives. Yet here he was, keeping vigil over a wild horse, as if it were one of his own Marines. The barn was quiet, except for the Mustang's labored breathing and the occasional rustle of straw as the horse shifted position. Outside, the winter wind continued to howl, but inside the stable, time seemed to stand still. Tom pulled up a bale of hay near the stall and settled in for what he knew would be a long day and night ahead. Something told him that the story of this Mustang was just beginning to unfold, and that his decision to help would lead him down a path he never expected to travel. Tom Reeves had never imagined himself becoming a rancher in Montana. 25 years in the Marine Corps had shaped him into a different kind of man, one who thrived on structure, discipline, and the unshakable bond between warriors. After his final tour, the transition to civilian life had hit him harder than any firefight ever had. The nightmares came first, then the restlessness, and finally the bone-deep realization that he no longer knew who he was without the uniform. The decision to buy the ranch had come after months of sleepless nights. In his small apartment near Camp Pendleton, the real estate listing had shown up on his computer screen during one of those endless dark hours. 100 acres of Montana wilderness, a weathered farmhouse, and enough projects to keep a man busy for years. Something about the property's isolation, its raw potential, had called to him in a way nothing else had since leaving the Corps. His savings, combined with his military pension, had been just enough to make the purchase. The locals had thought him crazy, buying a place that had stood empty for nearly a decade. The previous owner had let everything fall into disrepair. Fences sagged, the barn roof leaked, and the house itself needed more work than most people would be willing to tackle. But Tom had seen something in the property's bones that reminded him of the broken men he'd helped rebuild during his years as a senior NCO. The first year had been the hardest. Montana winters showed no mercy to newcomers, and Tom had learned his lessons the hard way. Frozen pipes, power outages that lasted for days, and the kind of solitude that made a man question his own thoughts. Yet there was peace in the physical labor, in the simple act of rebuilding something with his own hands. Each repaired fence post and replaced shingle felt like a step away from the memories that haunted him. His days had fallen into a routine that would have felt familiar to his younger self. Up before dawn, physical tasks that demanded both strength and precision, and the satisfaction of visible progress at day's end. The only difference was that now his missions involved mending. broken things rather than engaging enemy forces. The ranch had become his new battlefield, but one where victory meant creating rather than destroying. Tom had surprised himself by becoming known as something of a local fixture at Henderson's feed store in town. Mike Henderson, who had helped him with the Mustang, had been one of the first to look past Tom's initial reluctance to engage with the community. The older rancher had recognized something in Tom's demeanor, the way he carried himself, the precision with which he approached even simple tasks, and had gradually drawn him into the tight-knit circle of local ranchers. The feed store had become Tom's informal intelligence gathering point, much like the command centers he'd known in the Corps. Here, over coffee served in styrofoam cups, he learned about weather patterns, predator movements, and the thousand other details that could make or break a ranch. The other ranchers had initially viewed him with suspicion, another city boy playing at being a cowboy. But his quiet competence and willingness to learn had eventually earned their respect. It was during one of these morning gatherings that Tom had first heard about the wild Mustangs. The herds weren't supposed to range this far east, but there had been rumors of small groups breaking away from the main bands, pushed by drought and development to seek new territory. The old-timers spoke of the Mustangs with a mixture of admiration and concern, admiration for their untamed spirit, concern for their dwindling numbers. Tom had listened to these stories with interest, but had never expected to encounter one of the legendary horses himself. His property lay well outside the Mustangs' usual range, separated from their traditional territories by miles of fenced ranch land and the occasional highway. Yet here he was, tending to one of these magnificent creatures in his own barn. The barn itself had been one of his first major renovation projects. Something about the old structure had spoken to him. Perhaps its sturdy construction, or the way it had withstood decades of Montana winters despite neglect. He'd replaced the roof first, then reinforced the walls and installed new stalls, though he'd had no immediate plans for livestock. The work had given him purpose during those first difficult months, when the silence of his new life had threatened to overwhelm him. Now, as he worked to save the sick Mustang, Tom was grateful for every hour he'd spent making the barn into a proper shelter. The thick walls kept out the worst of the winter wind, and the new ventilation system he'd installed helped maintain a steady temperature despite the bitter cold outside. He'd even added a small tack room that he'd converted into a basic medical station, stocked with veterinary supplies that were now proving invaluable. As evening approached, Tom found himself studying the Mustang more closely. Despite its illness, there was an undeniable nobility in its bearing. The horse's coat, now that he'd cleaned away the ice and dirt, revealed a complex pattern of darker brown overlaid with copper highlights, colors that seemed to shift in the barn's artificial lighting. Its conformation spoke of speed and endurance, with powerful shoulders and the kind of deep chest that suggested remarkable stamina. But it was the scars that caught Tom's attention. Some were old and faded, the kind any wild horse might acquire from life on the range. Others, however, seemed more deliberate, the type of marks that came from human intervention. Near the Mustang's left shoulder, partially hidden by its mane, Tom noticed a pattern that looked almost like a brand, though unlike any he'd seen before. The discovery stirred something in his military mind, the part of him that had been trained to notice details others might miss. He'd seen enough government documentation to recognize official marking systems, and something about that partial brand tickled his memory. But the Mustang's condition demanded his full attention, and he filed away the observation for later consideration. As night fell, Tom settled into what he knew would be a long vigil. He'd seen enough cases of severe pneumonia in horses to know that the next 24 hours would be critical. The antibiotics would help, but the Mustang's survival would ultimately depend on its own strength and will to live. He pulled up a chair next to the stall, close enough to monitor the horse's breathing, but far enough away to avoid causing it any stress. The barn was quiet, except for the occasional stamp of the Mustang's hooves in the fresh straw and the distant howl of the wind outside. It reminded Tom of other nights spent on watch, though instead of scanning the horizon for threats, he found himself watching the rise and fall of the horse's flanks, counting breaths like he once counted the seconds between reconnaissance reports. In the stillness, Tom's mind wandered back to his last tour, to the night everything had changed. He rarely allowed himself to revisit those memories, but something about the Mustang's fighting spirit brought them to the surface. He remembered the explosion, the chaos that followed, and the long months of rehabilitation. Physical therapy had helped heal his body, but it was the horses at the Veterans Rehabilitation Center that had begun to heal his mind. Tom had never told anyone how. Close he'd come to giving up during those dark days. The horses at the rehab center had sensed his pain, responding to his brokenness with a gentle acceptance that he couldn't find anywhere else. Working with them had given him a purpose when he needed it most, teaching him that healing could come in many forms. Now, watching over the sick Mustang, Tom felt that same sense of purpose stirring within him. This wasn't just about saving a horse. It was about protecting something wild and free, something that represented the very spirit of the land he'd chosen as his sanctuary. As the night deepened and the temperature outside continued to drop, Tom maintained his vigil, determined to see this new mission through to whatever end awaited. As the first rays of dawn crept through the barn windows, Tom's vigilance was rewarded with a subtle change in the Mustang's condition. The horse's breathing, while still labored, had developed a steadier rhythm, and the glazed look in its eyes had begun to clear. Throughout the night, Tom had maintained a careful watch, applying cool compresses when the fever spiked and offering small amounts of water during moments of consciousness. The morning light revealed more details about his unexpected patient. The Mustang's face bore distinctive markings, a thin white blaze that ran from between its eyes down to its muzzle, creating a striking contrast against the dark brown coat. Its ears, constantly moving to track every sound in the barn, showed an alertness that hadn't been present the day before. Tom's satellite phone buzzed in his pocket, the only reliable form of communication this far out in the wilderness. It was Dr. Mia Martinez, the local veterinarian he'd managed to reach late. "Yesterday, I'm about an hour out," she said, her voice crackling through the connection. "How's our patient doing?" Tom described the Mustang's condition, noting every change he'd observed through the night. Mia listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed her years of experience with wild horses. While waiting for the vet to arrive, Tom took the opportunity to properly examine the mysterious brand he'd noticed earlier. With careful movements, he approached the Mustang's left side. The horse's muscles tensed, but it didn't pull away. Whether from weakness or growing trust, Tom couldn't be sure. Using gentle fingers, he parted the coarse hair around the mark. What he found made his military-trained mind snap to attention. The brand wasn't a traditional cattle or horse mark. It was an alphanumeric sequence, partially obscured by what appeared to be deliberate scarring. Tom had seen similar coding systems during his time in the Corps, usually associated with government projects. But what would a wild Mustang be doing with a government brand? And why would someone try to hide it? The sound of tires on gravel interrupted his examination. Dr. Martinez's truck pulled up outside, and Tom heard car doors slamming. Mia Martinez was a compact woman in her 40s, with sun-weathered skin and the confident movements of someone who'd spent a lifetime around large animals. Behind her came her assistant, carrying several bags of medical supplies. "Well, let's see what we've got here," Mia said, pulling on examination gloves as she approached the stall. She moved with practiced efficiency, her experienced eyes taking in every detail of the Mustang's condition. The horse watched her warily, but allowed her approach, something that made Mia raise her eyebrows in surprise. "This is unusual," she murmured, running professional hands along the Mustang's flanks. "Wild horses don't typically tolerate examination this well, even when they're sick." She paused at the brand, her fingers lingering over the marked area. "And this is very interesting." Tom watched as she worked, noting how her initial businesslike expression gradually shifted to one of intense concentration. After a thorough examination, she stepped back, pulling off her gloves with a thoughtful expression. "You've got quite a mystery on your hands, Tom. This isn't just any wild Mustang. The muscle development, the bone structure. This horse has had human contact before and significant medical care at some point." She pointed to several areas on the horse's body, old injury sites that showed signs of professional veterinary treatment. "See these scars? These weren't treated in the wild. Someone invested a lot of time and resources in this animal." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "And that brand, I've seen something similar before, but I can't quite place it." The Mustang shifted restlessly in its stall, and Mia quickly returned to the immediate medical concerns. She confirmed Tom's diagnosis of pneumonia and approved his choice of antibiotics, adding a few additional medications to the treatment plan. As she prepared an injection, she spoke in low tones about what she'd observed. "The good news is, the fever's starting to respond to treatment. The bad news is, this horse shouldn't be here at all. The nearest wild herd is over 100 miles away, and they don't typically range this far east, especially not alone." She administered the injection with practiced ease, the Mustang barely flinching. Something or someone brought this horse to this area, and recently Tom absorbed this information, his military instincts kicking into high gear. In the Corps, he'd learned that coincidences often weren't coincidences at all, and that unusual situations usually had complicated explanations. "What kind of operation would brand horses like this?" he asked, keeping his voice casual. Mia glanced at him sharply, then seemed to come to a decision. "There are various government programs involving wild horses, but most use standard identification systems. This," she gestured to the brand, "this is different. It reminds me of something I saw years ago when I was doing my residency near a research facility in Nevada. But that program was supposed to have been shut down." The mention of Nevada stirred something in Tom's memory. Fragments of conversations overheard during his last tour, whispered discussions about specialized training programs and experimental treatments. But before he could pursue that line of thought, the Mustang suddenly threw its head up, ears pricked forward, focusing intently on something outside the barn. Moments later, Tom heard it too. the distant sound of an approaching vehicle. Not the familiar rumble of ranch trucks, but the smoother purr of something more powerful. Mia must have noticed it as well, because she quickly began packing up her supplies, her movements decisive and purposeful. "Listen, Tom," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I'm going to write this up as a standard case of pneumonia in a stray horse. Nothing more. I'd suggest you do the same if anyone asks." She handed him several bottles of medication and a detailed treatment plan. "Call me if anything changes, but use my personal number, not the clinic line." The sound of the vehicle was growing closer. Tom's combat-trained senses were on high alert now, picking up details that others might miss. The weight of the engine suggested a larger vehicle, possibly an SUV, and the sound was coming from the north access road, not the main entrance to his property. Maya threw him a meaningful look as she headed for her truck. "Be careful, Tom. Sometimes helping a sick horse is just helping a sick horse. But sometimes—" She glanced at the partially hidden brand. "Sometimes it's something else entirely." With that cryptic warning, she and her assistant quickly departed, taking the south road out. Left alone with the Mustang, Tom found himself falling back on old military habits. He did a quick inventory of the barn, noting potential exits and defensive positions, an automatic response to perceived threat that he'd never quite lost. The horse seemed to share his unease, its previously relaxed posture now tense and alert. The sound of the approaching vehicle had stopped, but Tom's instincts told him they had company. Someone had parked off the main road and was likely approaching, on foot, a tactical decision that sent warning signals through his combat-trained mind. Moving quietly, he positioned himself near the barn door, where he could observe without being immediately visible. The Mustang's ears suddenly swiveled, tracking something Tom couldn't yet hear. Years of combat experience had taught him to trust an animal's instincts, and right now, every line of the horse's body spoke of tension and alertness. Whatever was coming, both man and beast seemed to sense that the morning's mysteries were about to deepen considerably. The crunch of snow under carefully placed boots reached Tom's ears, a sound he knew well from his days on patrol. Whoever was approaching had military training. Their movements were too deliberate, too measured for a casual visitor. The Mustang stood completely still in its stall, ears fixed forward, nostrils flaring as it tested the air for unfamiliar scents. From his position near the barn door, Tom could see a figure moving through the morning mist. Male, probably mid-40s, wearing civilian winter gear that couldn't quite disguise the military bearing underneath. The man paused at the edge of the clearing, scanning the area with practiced efficiency before proceeding toward the barn. Behind him, partially hidden by the trees, Tom caught glimpses of two more figures maintaining a wider perimeter. The first man reached the barn entrance, and Tom noticed how his right hand stayed casually close to his hip, the kind of stance that suggested concealed carry. "Hello?" the man called out, his voice carrying the clipped tones of someone used to giving orders. "Mr. Reeves, we need to speak with you about a missing horse." Tom stepped partially into view, keeping his own stance relaxed but ready. 25 years in the Corps had taught him how to read people, and everything about this man screamed federal agent. "I'm Reeves," he said simply, noting how the man's eyes immediately locked onto his position, assessing and cataloging potential threats. "Agent David Chen, Bureau of Land Management," the man said, producing an ID badge that looked authentic. "Enough. We're following up on reports of a wild horse in the area. Mind if we come in and take a look?" The question was posed politely, but Tom could hear the steel underlying the words. This wasn't really a request. The Mustang chose that moment to let out a soft nickering sound, and Tom saw Chen's expression flicker with recognition. The agent took a step forward, then stopped as Tom shifted his position slightly, maintaining the space between them. For a moment, the two men stood in silent evaluation of each other, a familiar dance of professionals recognizing their own kind. "That's an interesting ID," Tom said calmly, "but BLM agents don't usually travel in tactical formations or carry concealed weapons." He saw Chen's eyes narrow slightly at the observation. "Why don't we start with who you really are and what you want with my sick horse?" A tight smile crossed Chen's face as he tucked the badge away. "You've still got good instincts, Master Sergeant." Reeves, 25 years in the Corps, Force Recon, multiple combat deployments. You're not the kind of man who misses details. He paused, seemingly making a decision. "The horse you found, it's part of a classified program. I'm here to recover it." Tom maintained his position, mind racing through the implications. "The brand," he said, watching Chen's reaction. "It's not a standard BLM marker. Military program." The agent's slight hesitation confirmed Tom's suspicion. Behind Chen, the other two figures had moved closer, taking up flanking positions near the barn entrance. "The details are classified," Chen replied, his tone becoming more authoritative. "What I can tell you is that this animal is government property, and we need to transfer it to a secure facility immediately." He produced a set of official-looking documents from his coat. "We have the necessary transportation standing by." The Mustang moved restlessly in its stall, and Tom could see the fever was still affecting it despite the medication. "The horse has severe pneumonia," he stated flatly. "Moving it now could kill it." He met Chen's gaze directly. "And I'm curious why a classified military program would involve wild horses in the first place." Something flickered across Chen's face. Frustration, perhaps, or concern. "Mr. Reeves, I understand your position, but this isn't open for discussion. That animal is part of a program that goes well beyond your security clearance, even with your military background. We need to contain the situation before it attracts unwanted attention." Tom thought about Mia Martinez's hasty departure and cryptic warning. "Funny thing about attention," he said slowly. "It tends to grow when government agents show up unannounced at private ranches." He noticed Chen's companions shifting their positions slightly, and his combat instincts hummed with warning. "The local vet has already examined the horse," Tom continued, watching Chen's reaction carefully. "She's documented its condition and started treatment. Moving it now would not only be dangerous for the animal, but would raise questions I'm guessing you'd rather avoid." Chen's expression hardened. "The vet was here? Recently?" His hand moved slightly closer to his concealed weapon, a gesture Tom didn't miss. "That complicates things." He spoke quietly into a communication device on his collar, and Tom heard vehicles starting up in the distance. The Mustang suddenly threw its head up, letting out a distressed sound that echoed through the barn. Tom could see the fever was spiking again, the horse's flanks heaving with labored breaths. "That horse isn't going anywhere," he said firmly, allowing some of his own military authority to enter his voice. "Not until it's stable." Chen studied him for a long moment, then spoke into his comm unit again. The sound of vehicles faded as they presumably moved back. "You understand the sensitivity of this situation," he said finally. "We can give you 48 hours to stabilize the animal. After that, we're moving it with or without your cooperation." Tom recognized the compromise for what it was, a temporary stalemate between professionals who recognized each other's positions. "I'll need medical supplies," he said, maintaining eye contact with Chen, "and documentation of your authority to take the horse, properly vetted through official channels." A slight smile touched Chen's lips. "You'll have what you need, but understand, what you've stumbled into here goes deeper than you know. Keep it quiet, stabilize the horse, and we'll handle the rest." He pulled out a business card, offering it to Tom. "Call this number when the horse is ready to move. Don't try to investigate further." As Chen and his team departed, Tom watched them go with a growing sense of unease. The agent's words confirmed his suspicions that there was more to this Mustang than a simple case of a sick, wild horse. The brand, the governmental interest, the level of security, it all pointed to something larger, something that raised more questions than answers. The Mustang had settled somewhat, its breathing still labored but more stable. Tom approached the stall, studying the magnificent animal that had somehow drawn him into what was clearly a complex and potentially dangerous situation. The horse met his gaze, and in those dark eyes, Tom saw something that strengthened his resolve: intelligence, fear, and a desperate need for help. Moving to the medical supplies Maya had left, Tom began preparing the next round of antibiotics. Whatever classified program this horse had been part of, whatever secrets it carried in that mysterious brand, right now it needed him. And Tom Reeves had never been one to abandon those who needed his help, no matter the personal cost. The morning sun had risen fully now, casting long shadows through the barn windows. Tom could hear the distant sound of Chen's vehicles finally leaving his property, but he knew this wasn't over. In fact, he suspected it was just beginning. Something about this situation nagged at his combat-trained instincts, the kind of feeling that had saved his life more than once in the field. After Chen's departure, Tom spent the next several hours in deep thought as he tended to the Mustang. The horse's condition was slowly improving, but the mystery surrounding it had grown exponentially. The medication Mia had left was doing its job. The fever had stabilized, and the horse's breathing was becoming less labored with each passing hour. Tom's military training had taught him to analyze situations methodically, breaking down complex problems into manageable pieces. He began making mental notes of everything that seemed out of place: the sophisticated brand, Chen's quasi-military team, the level of security surrounding what should have been a simple matter of wild horse management, and Mia Martinez's obvious familiarity with whatever program was involved. As evening approached, he decided to take a calculated risk. Using the satellite phone, he called Mike Henderson, keeping his voice low, despite being alone in the barn. "Mike, I need you to do some discreet asking around about government programs involving wild horses, especially anything near Nevada. Don't mention the Mustang here. Just make it seem like casual interest." The Mustang watched him as he talked, its intelligent eyes following his movements. The horse's ears would occasionally flick toward the barn entrance, as if expecting more. Visitors. Tom had noticed this heightened alertness. It wasn't the typical wariness of a wild animal, but something more focused, almost tactical in nature. After hanging up with Mike, Tom began a more thorough examination of the horse, looking for any additional clues about its past. Beyond the mysterious brand, he found other unusual marks. Small scars that might have come from medical procedures, and areas where the coat pattern seemed deliberately altered, as if to disguise identifying marks. The horse's musculature was another anomaly. While wild Mustangs were naturally athletic, this one showed signs of specialized conditioning. Its shoulder and hindquarter development suggested training for specific tasks, not just the general fitness needed for survival. On the range, Tom had seen similar muscle patterns in military working dogs, animals trained for particular missions. As he worked, Tom's mind wandered back to his final years in the Corps. There had been rumors then about experimental programs involving animals, whispered conversations about enhanced capabilities and specialized training. At the time, he dismissed them as military gossip, but now those fragments of information seemed increasingly relevant. The satellite phone buzzed again, a text message from Mia Martinez. "Coming by tonight? Need to talk. Delete this." Tom erased the message immediately, recognizing the protocols of covert communication from his military days. The Mustang's ears pricked forward at his movement, and Tom found himself wondering just how much the animal understood about its situation. While waiting for Mia, Tom took the opportunity to review Chen's business card more carefully. The phone number looked standard enough, but the cardstock and printing quality were military grade. He'd seen similar cards during his time in special operations, ones designed to appear civilian while meeting specific security requirements. Mia arrived after dark, her truck's headlights off as she approached the barn. She entered quickly, her usual confident manner replaced by cautious movements and watchful eyes. "We need to talk about what you've gotten yourself into, Tom," she said without preamble, closing the barn door behind her. The veterinarian moved to check the Mustang's condition, her hands professional but gentle as she took its temperature and listened to its breathing. "The fever's coming down nicely," she noted, but her mind seemed elsewhere. After ensuring they were alone, she turned to Tom with an intensity he hadn't seen before. "That brand you found, it's from a program that officially doesn't exist," she began, keeping her voice low. "During my residency, I worked at a facility that was supposedly doing standard veterinary research. But some of the procedures, the security levels, the types of modifications they were making to these horses." She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with the memories. Tom leaned against the stable wall, processing this information. Modifications? What kind of modifications are we talking about? The Mustang shifted in its stall, as if responding to the tension in their voices. Mia moved to stroke its neck, her fingers lingering over the brand. Enhanced sensory capabilities, improved strength and endurance, advanced cognitive functions, she listed quietly. They were trying to create the perfect military mount, horses that could operate in conditions and situations that would break normal animals. But it went beyond that. Some of the experiments... She shook her head. Let's just say there were ethical concerns. The Mustang's eyes seemed to glow in the dim barn lighting as Maya spoke, and Tom couldn't shake the feeling that the horse was following their conversation. "How did this one end up in my field?" he asked, watching the animal's reactions carefully. Mia's expression grew more serious. "There was an incident at one of the facilities about 6 months ago. Several test subjects escaped. The official story was that they were all recovered, but rumors suggested otherwise." She paused, checking their surroundings again. "Tom, this horse isn't just valuable, it's dangerous. Not because it's violent, but because of what it represents. The program it came from operates in a gray area between military research and private contracting. There are people who would kill to keep it secret. Tom thought about Chen's visit, the subtle threats beneath the professional exterior. "They're coming back for it," he said. Not really a question. Mia nodded, her face grim. "In 48 hours, but they're watching the property now. I spotted a surveillance vehicle on my way in." The Mustang had moved closer to them, its head extended over the stall door. In the soft barn lighting, Tom could see details he'd missed before, the unusual awareness. In its gaze, the way it seemed to process information beyond normal animal capacity. Whatever had been done to this horse, it had created something extraordinary. "We need to make a decision," Mia said quietly. "Either we hand it over when they come back, or—" She left the alternative unspoken, but Tom understood. His years in the Corps had taught him that sometimes the right choice wasn't the legal one. The Mustang nickered softly, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Tom reached out to touch the horse's nose, feeling the warm breath against his palm. The animal had trusted him, had fought to survive with his help. Now he had to decide whether to return that trust or submit to the authority of a program that treated such magnificent creatures as mere test subjects. Maya watched him carefully, recognizing the military precision with which he was analyzing their options. "Whatever you decide," she said finally, "I'm with you. But we need to be smart about this. They're not going to let their secret just walk away." The implications hung heavy in the barn's silence. Tom had spent his entire military career following orders, operating within the chain of command. But he'd also sworn to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, to stand against injustice even when it wore an official uniform. As if reading his thoughts, the Mustang pressed its head against his chest, the gesture surprisingly gentle for such a powerful animal. In that moment, Tom felt the weight of his decision, understanding that whatever choice he made would set them both on an irreversible path. The next 24 hours became a carefully orchestrated dance of preparation and deception. Tom knew that if they were going to act, every detail would need to be perfect. His years in Force Recon had taught him the value of thorough planning, especially when operating against superior forces. The surveillance team Chen had left behind was professional but predictable. They maintained regular patterns that Tom could work with. Using his satellite phone, Tom made several calls that would appear routine to anyone monitoring his communications. He ordered additional medical supplies, discussed common ranch matters with Mike Henderson, and even scheduled a follow-up visit with Mia Martinez. Each call was designed to reinforce the impression that he was simply caring for a sick horse, nothing more. The Mustang seemed to sense the underlying tension, its behavior becoming more focused and deliberate. Tom noticed how it would move quietly in its stall when surveillance vehicles passed nearby, how it responded to hand signals he hadn't consciously taught it. The horse's intelligence was both remarkable and unsettling, clear evidence of the program's modifications. By midnight, Tom had developed a plan that drew on all his military experience. The ranch's location, which had initially attracted him, for its isolation, now offered tactical advantages. He knew every inch of his 100 acres, including several old logging trails that didn't appear on any current maps. More importantly, he knew the patterns of the land, how the wind moved through the valleys, where the shadows lay deepest, and which routes could support a horse's passage. Mia arrived as planned the next morning, her truck loaded with medical supplies that could easily be repurposed for their true intention. As she examined the Mustang, she spoke in normal tones about its recovery, but her eyes conveyed additional messages. She had made her own preparations, arranging for a network of sympathetic ranchers and veterinarians who could help if needed. The horse's condition had improved significantly, though they maintained the pretense of ongoing treatment. Its breathing was clear now, and the fever had broken completely. Tom could see the raw power returning to its muscles, the fierce energy barely contained beneath the surface. Whatever had been done to enhance this animal's capabilities was becoming more evident as it regained its strength. During Maya's examination, she quietly shared what she'd learned about the program. "They called it Project Pegasus," she whispered, her hands moving professionally over the Mustang's flanks. The goal was to create the ultimate military mount, horses that could operate in any terrain, under any conditions, with enhanced physical and cognitive abilities. Tom absorbed this information while pretending to review medication instructions. "How far did they get?" he asked, keeping his voice casual. Mia's expression darkened. "Further than anyone expected. They started with genetic modifications, then moved on to neural enhancements. This one," she nodded toward the Mustang, "shows all the markers of their most advanced work." The horse's ears flicked toward them as they spoke, its dark eyes showing that uncanny awareness that had first caught Tom's attention. "They succeeded too well, didn't they?" he murmured. "Created something they couldn't fully control." Mia nodded grimly. "That's why they're so desperate to get it back. It's not just about the research. It's about what these horses might be capable of if left to their own devices." Throughout the day, Tom maintained his normal routine while quietly setting his plan in motion. He moved equipment around the barn, positioning everything they would need under the guise of regular ranch work. The surveillance team showed no signs of suspicion. From their perspective, they were watching a former Marine caring for a sick horse while awaiting their return. As evening approached, Tom received another visit from Mike Henderson, who had brought information of his own. Over coffee in the barn, Mike revealed that he'd heard rumors about unusual military activity in the area months ago, around the time of the supposed escape. "There were helicopters in the high country," he said quietly, "and men in unmarked vehicles asking questions about strange horses." The Mustang watched their conversation intently, and Tom noticed how it responded to certain words and phrases. The horse's intelligence was no longer something he could deny or ignore. Whatever experiments had been performed on it had created something unprecedented, a creature that understood far more than anyone had intended. When Mike left, Tom began the final preparations. He knew they would have one chance to act before Chen's team returned, and everything would have to be perfect. The weather forecast called for snow overnight, conditions that could either help or hinder their plans, depending on how they use them. Mia returned after dark, her truck parked well away from the barn. She brought more than medical supplies this time. She had information about safe routes and potential sanctuaries where the Mustang might find protection. "There's a network of people," she explained, "who know about the program and want to help. Former researchers, animal rights activists, even some military personnel who thought the experiments went too far." The Mustang grew increasingly alert as they finalized their plans, as if it understood that something crucial was about to happen. Tom had seen this kind of awareness before. In highly trained military working dogs, the ability to sense and respond to operational preparations. But this was different, more profound. The horse wasn't just responding to their actions, it was actively participating in the planning. Using the barn's old tack room as an operations center, Tom laid out detailed maps of the surrounding terrain. The Mustang watched intently as he traced potential routes with his finger, its ears moving to track their quiet discussion of waypoints and alternatives. Several times, the horse made soft sounds or movements that seemed to indicate preferences or concerns about particular paths. Maya noticed it too. "The neural enhancements," she whispered. They were working on improving spatial awareness, navigation abilities. Some of the horses showed almost supernatural capabilities for finding their way through complex terrain. She paused, watching the Mustang's reactions. But this one seems to have developed abilities beyond anything in the research notes I saw. As midnight approached, the snow began falling as predicted, thick flakes that would soon cover their tracks. Tom moved through his final preparations with military precision, checking and double-checking every detail. The surveillance team maintained their position at the edge of his property, their attention focused on the main approaches. To the barn, the Mustang stood quietly in its stall, but Tom could sense its readiness. The horse's muscles were taut, its breathing controlled, showing none of the random movements of a normal animal. It was waiting, just as he was, for the perfect moment to act. Whatever experiments had been performed on this magnificent creature, they had created something that understood strategy and patience on an almost human level. Maya made one final check of the horse's condition, confirming it was strong enough for what lay ahead. "We'll have about a 4-hour window," she murmured, her hands moving professionally over the Mustang's legs. "After that, they'll realize something's wrong and bring in reinforcements." Tom nodded, already calculating distances and timing in his head. 4 hours would be tight, but it would have to be enough. Outside, the snow continued to fall, creating a natural screen that would help cover their movements. Tom could feel the weight of the moment approaching, the point of no return, when they would commit to their course of action. The Mustang seemed to feel it too, its entire body radiating a controlled energy that spoke of both power and intelligence. Everything was in place. Now they just had to wait for the right moment to begin their carefully planned escape. Tom watched the snow through the barn window, remembering all the times he'd led missions in hostile territory, but this time was different. This time he wasn't just following orders. He was choosing to act on behalf of something extraordinary, something that deserved more than a life as a military experiment. At precisely 2 in the morning, Tom initiated their plan. The snow had been falling steadily for hours, creating perfect conditions for what they were about to attempt. The Mustang stood quietly as Tom secured the specially modified tack that Mia had brought, equipment designed to be both comfortable and nearly invisible against the horse's dark coat. Moving with practiced stealth, Tom led the Mustang through the barn's rear entrance, using the building's bulk to shield their initial movements from the surveillance team. The horse matched his careful pace perfectly, placing each hoof with deliberate precision to minimize sound. This wasn't the behavior of a typical horse. This was the calculated movement of a highly trained operative. Maya had already departed in her truck, taking the main road in a way that would appear routine to any observers. She would be waiting at their first waypoint, ready to provide support if needed. Tom had chosen their route carefully, utilizing the natural features of the landscape to mask their movement. The old logging trails he'd identified would take them through terrain, too rough for vehicles to follow. The Mustang's enhanced capabilities became immediately apparent as they began their journey. The horse navigated the difficult terrain with supernatural sure-footedness, choosing paths through the darkness that even Tom's night vision trained eyes hadn't identified. Its breathing remained controlled and steady, showing none of the stress a normal horse would experience under these conditions. They moved through the forest like shadows, the falling snow masking their tracks almost as quickly as they made them. Tom maintained physical contact with the Mustang, using light pressure and silent signals to communicate. The horse responded with an intelligence that still amazed him, anticipating obstacles and adjusting its pace to maintain optimal stealth. An hour into their journey, they heard the distant sound of vehicles on the main road. The Mustang's ears swiveled toward the noise, but it maintained its steady pace. Tom recognized the sound patterns. Chen's team was rotating their surveillance positions following their established schedule. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The first real test came when they needed to cross a small clearing. Tom paused at the tree line, assessing the risk. The Mustang stood perfectly still beside him, its body radiating an awareness that matched his own combat-trained instincts. After ensuring the area was clear, they moved across the open space in perfect synchronization, their movements timed between the gusts of wind that swept snow through the air. Near the halfway point of their planned route, they reached the first waypoint. Mia's truck was parked exactly where it should be, hidden beneath a natural overhang. She emerged from the shadows as they approached, moving with the careful precision of someone who understood the stakes involved. "No signs of pursuit," she whispered, checking the Mustang's condition with professional efficiency. "But we've picked up chatter on the emergency frequencies. They're starting to increase patrols on the main roads." The horse remained perfectly still during her examination, its eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Tom checked his watch, calculating their progress. They were making better time than expected, thanks to the Mustang's extraordinary capabilities. The horse seemed to possess an almost tactical understanding of their situation, adjusting its pace and position to maximize their advantages. As Mia completed her check, the Mustang suddenly tensed, its head turning sharply toward the northeast. Moments later, Tom heard it too. The faint sound of helicopter rotors in the distance. They were running aerial search patterns, probably using thermal imaging to scan the area. Without hesitation, the Mustang moved toward a dense stand of pine trees, practically pulling Tom along. The thickness of the branches would help mask their heat signatures from above. Tom marveled at the horse's tactical awareness. This was far beyond normal animal instinct. Mia quickly returned to her truck, preparing to depart along a separate route that would draw attention away from their true path. The Mustang watched her go, its intelligent eyes tracking her movements until she disappeared into the snowy darkness. They waited under the pine canopy until the helicopter passed, its searchlight sweeping the forest below. The Mustang stood motionless, its dark coat blending perfectly with the shadows. Tom could feel the horse's muscles trembling slightly, not from fear or exhaustion, but from the controlled energy of a trained operative maintaining position. Once the immediate threat had passed, they resumed their journey. The snow was falling harder now, which worked in their favor by further obscuring their trail. The Mustang moved with increased urgency, seeming to understand that their window of opportunity was slowly closing. The next phase of their route took them through a series of narrow ravines, terrain that would be nearly impassable for normal Horses, especially in these conditions. But this was where the program's modifications became truly evident. The Mustang navigated the treacherous path with impossible precision, its enhanced capabilities allowing it to find purchase on surfaces that should have been too slick or unstable to support its weight. Tom's military training had taught him to recognize and appreciate superior operational capabilities, and what he was witnessing was beyond anything he'd encountered before. The horse wasn't just moving through the terrain, it was reading it, processing information, and making tactical decisions in real time. They passed several motion sensors that Tom had identified during his preparation, standard military surveillance equipment that Chen's team had probably installed months ago. The Mustang seemed to sense these as well, adjusting its path to stay just outside their detection range without any guidance from Tom. As they approached the 3-hour mark of their journey, the sound of vehicles on the distant main road became more frequent. The search was intensifying, just as they had anticipated. But they were now in the most remote part of their route, using terrain that would force any pursuit to fall far behind. The Mustang's stamina showed no signs of flagging, its breathing remaining steady despite the difficult conditions. Whatever modifications the program had made to enhance its physical capabilities had created something remarkable. An animal that could maintain peak performance far beyond normal limits. They reached a high ridge that offered a brief view of the valley. Below, emergency vehicles were now visible on several of the main roads, their lights cutting through the falling snow. The search pattern was obvious to Tom's trained eye. They were establishing a perimeter, trying to contain what they must now realize was an escape attempt. The Mustang pawed the ground once, softly, drawing Tom's attention to movement in the trees below. Through the swirling snow, he caught glimpses of figures moving through the forest, ground teams deploying to search the area. The horse's enhanced senses had detected them before his own well-trained instincts had registered their presence. Without any prompting, the Mustang began moving along the ridge, using the terrain to mask their position from the searchers below. Its choices of path and pace showed a sophisticated understanding of tactical movement that went far beyond natural animal behavior. This was the product of extensive military-grade training combined with enhanced cognitive capabilities. They were now entering the most critical phase of their escape. The next hour would determine whether they reached their ultimate destination, a hidden sanctuary where Mia had arranged protection for the Mustang, or whether they would be caught in the rapidly tightening net of searchers. The horse seemed to sense the increasing stakes, its movements becoming even more precise and deliberate. Every step was carefully chosen, every pause timed perfectly to avoid detection. Tom found himself following the Mustang's lead more often than not, trusting in its enhanced capabilities and tactical awareness. A sudden change in the wind brought the sound of more helicopters, this time from multiple directions. The search was escalating, bringing in additional resources. The Mustang's ears swiveled, tracking each new sound, its body tense but controlled as it calculated their next move. Dawn was approaching as Tom and the Mustang reached the critical phase of their escape. The eastern sky had begun to lighten, though the heavy snowfall still provided crucial cover. They had deviated from their original route 3 times now, the horses' enhanced senses detecting search parties before they became visible through the swirling snow. The Mustang moved with incredible precision through a dense section of forest, its hooves finding secure placement on treacherous ground that should have been impossible to navigate. Tom's satellite phone vibrated. A text from Mia confirming she had successfully drawn some of the search team south with a false trail. The horse's ears pricked forward at the slight sound, its head turning questioningly toward Tom. Through the gradually lightening darkness, Tom caught sight of something that made his combat-trained instincts surge to full alert. Fresh tracks in the snow, not from the search teams, but from another horse. The Mustang had already noticed them, its nostrils flaring as it tested the air. The tracks were different from normal horse prints, showing the same precise placement and tactical awareness that Tom had observed in his companion. Another escaped test subject from Project Pegasus, Tom realized. The Mustang's behavior confirmed his suspicion. Its entire demeanor had changed, becoming more focused and alert. The horse moved forward with renewed purpose, following the tracks with an intensity that spoke of recognition. They tracked the signs through increasingly difficult terrain, moving deeper into territory that would be nearly impassable for the search team's vehicles. The other horse had chosen its route well, using natural features to mask its trail and avoid detection. Tom recognized the same military-grade tactical movement that his Mustang displayed. A low whistle cut through the pre-dawn air, barely audible, but carrying a distinct pattern that Tom recognized from his military days. A signal. The Mustang responded immediately, producing an answering whistle that sounded nothing like normal horse vocalizations. From the shadows ahead, a dark shape emerged. Another Mustang, its coat a deep black that seemed to absorb what little light filtered through the clouds. The two horses approached each other cautiously, but with clear recognition. Tom watched in amazement as they engaged in what could only be described as a tactical assessment of each other, moving in patterns that reminded him of military recognition protocols. The new Mustang bore similar signs of the program's modifications. The same enhanced musculature, the same intelligent awareness in its eyes. A sound from above sent both horses into immediate defensive positions. A helicopter was approaching, its search pattern bringing it dangerously close to their location. Without hesitation, the black Mustang led them toward a rocky overhang that would shield them from thermal imaging. The horses moved in perfect synchronization, their enhanced capabilities allowing them to navigate the treacherous terrain at speed while maintaining complete stealth. Under the overhang, Tom examined the new Mustang more closely. It bore the same type of brand as his companion, though partially obscured by different scarring patterns. The horse regarded him with the same unnerving intelligence he'd grown accustomed to in his own charge, its eyes showing clear assessment and calculation. The helicopter passed overhead, its searchlight probing the forest below. Both horses remained perfectly still, their bodies pressed against the rock face in a way that minimized their heat signatures. Tom noticed how they positioned themselves to shield him as well, a deliberate tactical choice that spoke volumes about their enhanced cognitive abilities. As the sound of the helicopter faded, Tom's satellite phone vibrated again. Mia had reached the sanctuary and was confirming it was secure. But the message contained something else, a warning. Chen's team had called in military reinforcements. They were deploying additional resources, including specialized tracking units. The Black Mustang seemed to sense the increased urgency, nudging them into motion before Tom could even process their next move. It led them through a series of switchbacks that took advantage of the terrain's natural features to break up their trail. The horse moved with the confidence of one who had traveled this route before, suggesting it had been using these mountains as a hidden pathway since its own escape. Both Mustangs demonstrated extraordinary stamina as they climbed higher into the mountains. The program's physical enhancements were evident in their steady breathing and sure-footed progress through terrain that would have exhausted normal horses. They maintained a pace that seemed impossible given the conditions, yet showed no signs of tiring. The sound of another helicopter approaching sent them seeking cover again, this time in a dense stand of pines. As they waited, Tom observed the silent communication between the two horses, subtle shifts in posture and expression that conveyed complex information. They were coordinating, he realized, using their enhanced intelligence to develop cooperative strategies. When they resumed their journey, the Black Mustang led them along a route that seemed deliberately designed to confuse pursuit. They would double back occasionally, cross streams to break their trail, and use rocky ground that would hold no tracks. The tactical sophistication of their movement patterns exceeded anything Tom had seen in his military career. The eastern sky had lightened, enough to reveal more details of their surroundings when they heard the first dogs. The search teams had deployed tracking hounds. Their baying carried on the wind from several directions. Both horses reacted to the sound with tactical precision, immediately adjusting their route to take advantage of the wind direction. They crossed a swift-running stream, the Mustangs choosing their crossing point with expert consideration of both safety and tactical advantage. The cold water would help mask their scent from the dogs, and the rocky banks would leave minimal signs of their passage. Tom marveled at the level of strategic thinking he was witnessing. As they climbed higher, the snow began to ease, revealing glimpses of the valley below. Search teams had established a wide perimeter, their vehicles visible on the main roads that circled the mountain. But they were now well above the searchers, using terrain that would force any pursuit to fall far behind. The Black Mustang led them to a hidden valley concealed behind a ridge that wouldn't be visible from the air. Here, signs of other escaped horses became evident, subtle marks that would be meaningless to most observers, but spoke clearly to Tom's trained eye. This was some kind of gathering point, a secure location where the escaped test subjects could find safety. Both horses became more relaxed as they entered the valley, though they maintained their tactical awareness. The Black Mustang moved ahead, disappearing briefly into a stand of trees before returning with two more horses, a bay and a gray, both bearing the same signs of enhancement and modification that Tom had observed in his companion. The reunion was fascinating to watch. The horses greeted each other with clear recognition, their interactions showing levels of communication and cooperation that went far beyond normal equine behavior. They moved in coordinated patterns, maintaining security while welcoming the newcomers to their hidden sanctuary. Maya's final message confirmed what Tom was seeing. This wasn't just an escape, it was part of a larger pattern. The enhanced horses had been finding each other, using their superior capabilities to establish a network of safe locations in the most remote parts of the mountains. They were demonstrating not just tactical awareness, but strategic planning, on a scale that the program's creators had probably never anticipated. The morning sun finally broke through the clouds as Tom watched the Mustangs interact. His own companion had integrated seamlessly into the group, its movements now coordinated with the others in a display of tactical cooperation that would have impressed any military commander. They had created something remarkable here, a community of extraordinary beings that had transcended their intended purpose to find freedom on their own terms. The hidden valley proved to be more than just a temporary sanctuary. As Tom observed the gathering of enhanced Mustangs, he began to understand the true scope of what had evolved from Project Pegasus's experiments. The horses had established a sophisticated network, using their enhanced intelligence and capabilities to create something unprecedented in the wilderness of Montana's mountains. Maya arrived at the valley just before noon, her approach carefully coordinated through a series of signals that the horses seemed to recognize and acknowledge. She brought with her detailed files that she'd been gathering since her days at the research facility, documentation that revealed the full extent of the program's achievements and its ultimate failure to contain what it had created. They never expected this level of cooperation, she explained, spreading the papers across a flat rock while the Mustangs grazed nearby, their positions carefully maintained to provide optimal surveillance of the surrounding area. The enhanced cognitive abilities were supposed to make them better at following commands, not at developing independent strategies. The files detailed the progression of the program, from its early genetic modifications to the increasingly sophisticated neural enhancements that had produced such extraordinary results. The horses had been designed to operate independently in combat situations, using their enhanced capabilities to navigate difficult terrain and respond to complex tactical situations. Tom's Mustang approached as they reviewed the documents, its intelligent eyes scanning the papers as if it could understand the contents. Given what they'd witnessed of its capabilities, Tom wasn't entirely sure it couldn't. The horses' presence drew the attention of the others, and soon they had gathered in a loose circle, their positioning suggesting a deliberate security formation. "Look at this," Mia pointed to a section of the documentation. "They achieved something they never intended. The neural enhancements didn't just improve individual capabilities, they created the potential for a kind of collective intelligence. These horses aren't just cooperating, they're building something entirely new." The evidence was there in the way the Mustangs moved and interacted. Their enhanced intelligence had allowed them to develop sophisticated communication systems, sharing information and coordinating their actions with military precision. The Black Mustang that had led them to the valley appeared to hold a leadership role, but the hierarchy was fluid, adapting to different situations and requirements. Throughout the afternoon, Tom observed more signs of their organizational complexity. The horses maintained a rotating watch schedule, with pairs of Mustangs taking turns to patrol the valley's perimeter. They used their enhanced senses and tactical awareness to monitor for any approach, their movements suggesting years of military-grade training combined with their natural instincts. Maya's presence seemed to trigger memories in some of the horses. Several approached her cautiously, showing signs of recognition. "Some of them remember me from the facility," she explained softly. "I tried to help when I could, to ease their discomfort during the procedures. I never imagined they'd achieve this level of independence." The documentation revealed darker aspects of the program as well. Not all the experiments had been successful, and many horses had suffered in the process of developing the enhancements. The ones that had escaped represented the program's greatest success and its worst nightmare. These Mustangs had not only survived, but had evolved beyond their creators' intentions. As evening approached, they detected increased activity in the valleys below. Chen's team had expanded their search pattern, bringing in additional resources and personnel. The horses responded to the threat with coordinated efficiency, adjusting their positions to minimize the chance of detection from the air while maintaining clear escape routes. Tom's military experience allowed him to appreciate the sophistication of their tactical responses. They're not just hiding, he observed, they're conducting counter-surveillance operations, using terrain, weather conditions, and coordinated movements to mask their presence. This is beyond anything the program could have anticipated. Mia nodded, adding more context from her time at the facility. The original goal was to create enhanced mounts for special operations. Horses that could operate independently in complex terrain while carrying operators, but they pushed the cognitive enhancements too far. These horses developed not just intelligence, but consciousness, real self-awareness. The Mustangs had gathered more closely as darkness fell, their positions creating overlapping fields of observation that provided complete coverage of their surroundings. Tom's companion stayed near him, occasionally touching his shoulder with its nose in what seemed like a gesture of reassurance. The bond they had formed went beyond simple trust. It was a partnership between equals. Through the night, they could hear the distant sound of helicopters and vehicles as the search continued. The horses remained calm, but alert, their enhanced senses allowing them to track the movement of search teams even through the darkness. They had clearly dealt with similar situations before, their responses suggesting well-practiced evacuation protocols. Maya shared more details from her files, revealing how the program had attempted to control the horses through various means: specialized training, behavioral conditioning, even chemical restraints. But the enhanced intelligence that made them valuable had also made them resistant to such controls. They had developed their own ways of thinking, their own desires for freedom. The black Mustang that had guided them to safety approached as they discussed this, its presence adding weight to Mia's words. The horse's eyes reflected a depth of understanding that made it clear why the program had ultimately failed. These weren't just enhanced animals, they were conscious beings, capable of making their own choices. Dawn brought new challenges as the search teams began moving into the higher elevations. The Mustangs responded by implementing what appeared to be pre-planned evasion protocols, breaking into smaller groups that could move more discreetly through the terrain. Tom's companion remained with him, but he could see the strategic logic in their dispersal. They're not just running, Mia observed. They're executing a coordinated strategy. Each group knows where to go, how to maintain communication, when to regroup. They've developed their own tactical doctrine based on their enhanced capabilities. The sophistication of their response highlighted how far beyond the program's parameters they had evolved. Throughout the morning, they received updates from Maya's network of supporters, veterinarians, ranchers, and others who understood the significance of what these horses represented. The search teams were casting an increasingly wide net, but the Mustangs' knowledge of the terrain and their enhanced capabilities gave them a significant advantage. Tom's military training allowed him to appreciate the complexity of what he was witnessing. The horses weren't just demonstrating enhanced physical capabilities, they were showing advanced strategic thinking, long-term planning, and sophisticated problem-solving skills. They had taken their military training and adapted it to serve their own purposes. As the day progressed, more Mustangs arrived at the valley, using hidden trails and complex routing to avoid detection. Each new arrival was integrated into their security pattern with seamless efficiency, demonstrating a level of organizational sophistication that went far beyond instinct or training. They were building something remarkable, a community of enhanced beings that operated on principles of mutual support and collective security. The documentation Maya had brought revealed that the program had never intended this outcome. The enhancements were supposed to create more effective military assets, not independent beings capable of organizing their own resistance. The project's scientists had focused so intently on improving individual capabilities that they had failed to anticipate how these improvements might combine to produce something entirely new. Tom's companions stayed close as they observed the ongoing activities in the valley, its presence a constant reminder of the unexpected connection that had brought them to this point. The horse's enhanced intelligence was evident in every interaction, every decision, every response to changing circumstances. It had chosen to trust him, to bring him into this hidden world of extraordinary beings. Maya's files contained proposals for expanding the program, for developing even more advanced enhancements. But the evidence before them showed why such plans were doomed to fail. The horses had already evolved beyond any possibility of control, developing their own society with its own rules and objectives. They had taken the capabilities given to them by the program and used them to create something their creators had never imagined possible. As the day wore on, Tom realized that they had stumbled onto something far more significant than a simple case of escaped research subjects. These Mustangs represented a new form of intelligence, one that combined enhanced cognitive capabilities with natural instincts and learned tactical skills. They had created their own community, their own culture, their own way of life in the wilderness of the mountains. The sound of approaching helicopters brought their observations to an end, sending the Mustangs into another well-coordinated dispersal pattern. Tom watched as they moved with practiced efficiency, each horse knowing its role in their collective security. His companion nudged him gently, indicating it was time for them to move as well. Whatever came next, he understood that he was now part of something extraordinary, a witness to an evolution that had transcended its origins to become something truly remarkable. The decision to stay with the Mustangs came naturally to Tom. As the search teams closed in on their location, he found himself drawn deeper into their world of sophisticated strategies and coordinated movements. His military training merged seamlessly with their enhanced capabilities, creating a partnership that seemed to transcend the boundaries between human and horse. Mia had established a hidden network of safe locations throughout the mountain range, places where the escaped Mustangs could find shelter and support. The horses used these locations as part of their larger strategy, moving between them in patterns designed to confuse and misdirect any pursuit. Their enhanced intelligence allowed them to maintain complex communication across vast distances, coordinating their movements with tactical precision. The black Mustang that had first led them to the valley emerged as a key figure in their organization. Tom observed how it coordinated with other horses, directing their movements with subtle signals that spoke of advanced military training, combined with something entirely new. The horse's enhanced cognitive abilities had evolved beyond its training, developing into a form of leadership that balanced tactical necessity with the needs of the group. Through Maya's documentation, Tom began to understand the full scope of what Project Pegasus had unintentionally created. The neural enhancements hadn't just improved the horse's individual capabilities, they had fundamentally altered how they processed and shared information. The Mustangs had developed their own form of collective intelligence, using their enhanced abilities to create a sophisticated network of mutual support and protection. Chen's team continued to expand their search, bringing in additional resources and specialized tracking equipment. But the Mustangs stayed one step ahead, using their enhanced senses and tactical awareness to anticipate and avoid each new threat. They employed counter-surveillance techniques that would have impressed any special operations unit, using terrain and weather conditions to mask their movements. Tom's companion remained close, their bond growing stronger as they worked together to protect the herd. The horse's intelligence manifested in ways that constantly surprised him: strategic thinking, problem-solving, and an ability to adapt to changing situations that went far beyond normal animal behavior. They communicated through subtle gestures and shared understanding, each learning from the other's strengths. The valley became a temporary command center, with horses arriving and departing according to carefully coordinated schedules. Each new arrival brought information about search, team movements, and potential threats, which was quickly integrated into their collective strategy. The Mustangs maintained a sophisticated security perimeter with rotating patrols and overlapping fields of observation that provided comprehensive coverage. Amaya's network of supporters grew as news of the escaped horses spread through carefully protected channels. Veterinarians, ranchers, and others who understood the significance of what these animals represented offered assistance and protection. The Mustangs seemed to recognize these allies, adjusting their behavior based on complex assessments of trust and reliability. The documentation revealed more about the program's ultimate goals: the creation of enhanced military mounts capable of operating independently in complex environments. But the scientists had pushed the boundaries too far, creating beings whose intelligence and self-awareness had evolved beyond any possibility of control. The horses had taken their enhanced capabilities and used them to forge their own path to freedom. As days turned into weeks, Tom witnessed the continuing evolution of their society. The Mustangs didn't just survive in the wilderness. They thrived, using their enhanced capabilities to create something entirely new. They maintained complex social structures, shared information across vast distances, and worked together with a level of cooperation that defied explanation. Chen's team eventually scaled back their active search operations, but satellite surveillance and periodic patrols continued. The Mustangs adapted to this new threat, developing sophisticated routines for avoiding detection while maintaining their freedom of movement. They used their enhanced intelligence to identify and exploit gaps in the surveillance coverage, moving between safe locations with tactical precision. Tom's military experience proved invaluable in helping them refine their strategies. He worked with the horses to develop new counter-surveillance techniques, combining his knowledge of military operations with their enhanced capabilities. The Mustangs showed a remarkable ability to learn and adapt, incorporating new tactics into their existing repertoire with sophisticated understanding. Maya continued to provide support and documentation, helping them understand more about the program's achievements and its ultimate failure to contain what it had created. The neural enhancements had produced something unprecedented: beings capable of complex thought, strategic planning, and genuine consciousness. The horses had used these capabilities to create their own community, one based on mutual support and collective security. The Black Mustang's leadership style fascinated Tom. It didn't dominate through force, but through a kind of shared understanding, coordinating the group's activities with subtle signals and careful consideration of each horse's capabilities. The enhanced intelligence they possessed allowed for a form of democracy, with decisions made through complex processes of communication and consensus. Winter gave way to spring, and the Mustangs adapted their strategies to the changing conditions. They used the new growth to better conceal their movements, while maintaining their sophisticated network of safe locations and escape routes. Their enhanced stamina and physical capabilities allowed them to cover vast distances, making it impossible for any pursuit to effectively track their movements. Tom's companion remained his constant partner, their relationship deepening into something that transcended simple companionship. The horse's intelligence manifested in countless ways: strategic suggestions, tactical warnings, and a deep understanding of complex situations. They worked together as equals, each bringing their own strengths to their shared mission of protecting the herd. The documentation Maya had preserved revealed more about how the program had achieved its remarkable results. The combination of genetic modifications and neural enhancements had created beings capable of processing and sharing information in entirely new ways. The horses had taken these capabilities and developed them far beyond anything their creators had imagined possible. As their community grew, the Mustangs established new patterns of behavior and organization. They maintained complex communication networks, sharing information about threats and opportunities across their extended territory. Their enhanced intelligence allowed them to adapt quickly to new challenges, developing sophisticated responses to changing conditions. The presence of other escape test subjects continued to expand their capabilities. Each new arrival brought different enhanced abilities and experiences which were quickly integrated into their collective knowledge. The horses showed an extraordinary ability to learn from each other, combining their various strengths to create more effective strategies. Tom found himself increasingly drawn into their world of sophisticated tactics and coordinated movements. His military training merged with their enhanced capabilities, creating new approaches to security and survival. The horses demonstrated an amazing ability to understand and incorporate human tactical concepts, adapting them to serve their own purposes. Maya's network provided crucial support, helping to maintain the secrecy of their location while ensuring the horses had access to necessary resources. The Mustangs showed remarkable judgment in their interactions with human allies, using their enhanced intelligence to assess trustworthiness and maintain operational security. Through it all, Tom's companion remained his closest ally, their partnership growing stronger with each passing day. The horses' enhanced intelligence manifested in countless subtle ways: strategic insights, tactical warnings, and a deep understanding of complex situations. They had developed a form of communication that went beyond words, based on mutual trust and shared experience. The valley became a symbol of something larger, a place where enhanced intelligence had evolved beyond its intended purpose to create something truly extraordinary. The Mustangs had taken their military training and advanced capabilities and used them to forge their own path, creating a community that represented a new form of consciousness in the wild. As spring progressed, Tom realized that he had become part of something unprecedented, a witness to and participant in the evolution of a new form of intelligence. The horses had transcended their origins as military experiments to become something more, conscious beings capable of creating their own society, their own culture, their own way of life in the wilderness of the mountains. 1 year had passed since Tom first discovered the sick Mustang in his field. The hidden valley had transformed into a thriving sanctuary, where the enhanced horses had created something unprecedented in the history of human-animal relationships. What had begun as a desperate escape had evolved into a sophisticated community that challenged everything Tom thought he knew about consciousness and intelligence. Spring brought new challenges and opportunities as Chen's team maintained periodic surveillance of the region. The Mustangs had developed increasingly sophisticated methods of avoiding detection, using their enhanced capabilities to maintain their freedom while expanding their network of safe locations throughout the mountain range. Their strategic thinking had evolved far beyond their military training, incorporating natural instincts with advanced tactical awareness. Tom's companion, whom he had come to call Shadow, for its remarkable ability to move unseen through even the most challenging terrain, had become much more than just a partner. The horse's enhanced intelligence continued to reveal new depths, demonstrating problem-solving abilities and strategic thinking that regularly left Tom in awe. They worked together as equals, each bringing unique strengths to their shared mission of protecting the herd. Maya's documentation of Project Pegasus had proven invaluable in understanding the full scope of what they were dealing with. The program's scientists had combined genetic modifications with neural enhancements, creating beings capable of processing and sharing information in ways that went far beyond their original parameters. The horses had taken these capabilities and developed them into something entirely new, a form of collective intelligence that allowed them to operate as a sophisticated network. The Black Mustang, recognized as a leader among the enhanced horses, continued to coordinate their activities with remarkable efficiency. Its approach to leadership reflected a deep understanding of both tactical necessity and group dynamics, maintaining security while fostering the development of their unique society. Under its guidance, the horses had established complex protocols for everything from security patrols to the integration of new arrivals. Throughout the year, more enhanced Mustangs had found their way to the sanctuary, each bringing new capabilities and experiences that strengthened the herd. The horses demonstrated an extraordinary ability to learn from each other, combining their various enhanced abilities to create more effective strategies for survival and growth. Their collective intelligence seemed to expand with each new arrival, developing in ways that even Mia's extensive research couldn't fully explain. The valley itself had become a sophisticated operations center, with the horses maintaining constant surveillance while developing new methods of communication and coordination. They used their enhanced senses to monitor vast areas of territory, sharing information through a complex system of signals that combined their military training with natural equine behavior. Their security protocols would have impressed any special operations unit, incorporating multiple layers of defense with carefully planned escape routes. Tom's military experience had found new purpose in working with these extraordinary beings. His understanding of tactical operations merged with their enhanced capabilities, creating innovative approaches to security and survival. The horses showed a remarkable ability to grasp complex military concepts, adapting them to their own needs while developing entirely new strategies based on their unique abilities. Maya's network of supporters had grown more organized and effective, providing crucial resources while maintaining absolute secrecy about the sanctuary's location. The Mustangs demonstrated impressive judgment in their interactions with human allies, using their enhanced intelligence to assess trustworthiness and maintain operational security. They had developed sophisticated protocols for dealing with potential threats, including elaborate deception operations to mislead any attempts at tracking their movements. The documentation revealed more about how Project Pegasus had achieved its remarkable results, but also highlighted how completely the program had lost control of its creation. The combination of enhanced physical capabilities and advanced cognitive functions had produced beings capable of genuine consciousness and independent thought. The horses had taken these artificial improvements and developed them into something organic and self-sustaining. Spring rains had brought new growth to the valley, which the horses used to further conceal their activities. Their enhanced stamina and physical capabilities allowed them to cover vast distances, making it impossible for conventional tracking methods to maintain surveillance. They had developed an intimate knowledge of the terrain, using natural features to mask their movements while maintaining their complex network of safe locations. Tom observed how the Mustang society continued to evolve, developing new patterns of behavior and organization that went far beyond anything he had seen in normal horses. Their enhanced intelligence allowed them to maintain sophisticated social structures, with different horses taking on specialized roles based on their individual strengths and capabilities. They demonstrated an understanding of tactical operations that rivaled human military units, while maintaining the natural grace and power that made them such magnificent creatures. Shadow's own capabilities continued to develop, showing new depths of understanding and strategic thinking. The horse's enhanced intelligence manifested in countless ways, from anticipating potential threats to developing innovative solutions to complex problems. Their partnership had evolved into something that transcended traditional human-animal relationships, based on mutual respect and shared commitment to protecting their unique community. The presence of other escaped test subjects had expanded their collective capabilities in unexpected ways. Each enhanced Mustang brought different modifications and experiences, which were quickly integrated into their shared knowledge base. The horses showed an extraordinary ability to learn from each other, combining their various enhancements to create more effective strategies for survival and growth. Through Maya's continued research, they gained better understanding of how the program's modifications had achieved such remarkable results. The neural enhancements hadn't just improved individual capabilities, they had created the potential for a new form of intelligence, one that combined advanced cognitive functions with natural instincts and learned behaviors. The horses had taken these artificial improvements and developed them into something organic and self-sustaining. As the season progressed, the Mustangs established new patterns of behavior and organization that reflected their growing sophistication. They maintained complex communication networks across vast distances, sharing information about potential threats and opportunities throughout their extended territory. Their enhanced intelligence allowed them to adapt quickly to new challenges, developing innovative responses to changing conditions. The valley had become more than just a sanctuary. It was a symbol of something larger, a place where enhanced intelligence had evolved beyond its intended purpose to create something truly extraordinary. The Mustangs had taken their military training and advanced capabilities and used them to forge their own path, creating a community that represented a new form of consciousness in the wild. Tom's role had evolved as well, from protector to partner, in something unprecedented. His military experience merged seamlessly with their enhanced capabilities, creating new approaches to security and survival. The horses demonstrated an amazing ability to understand and incorporate human tactical concepts, adapting them to serve their own purposes while developing entirely new strategies based on their unique abilities. Maya's network provided crucial support, helping to maintain the secrecy of their location while ensuring the horses had access to necessary resources. The Mustangs showed remarkable judgment in their interactions with human allies, using their enhanced intelligence to assess trustworthiness and maintain operational security. They had developed sophisticated protocols for dealing with potential threats, including elaborate deception operations to mislead any attempts at tracking their movements. As the year anniversary of Shadow's arrival approached, Tom realized that he had become part of something far larger than a simple rescue operation. He was witnessing the evolution of a new form of intelligence, one that combined the best aspects of human tactical thinking with the natural wisdom and power of these magnificent creatures. The enhanced Mustangs had transcended their origins as military experiments to become something more. Conscious beings capable of creating their own society, their own culture, their own way of life in the wilderness of the mountains. The Black Mustang's leadership continued to impress Tom with its sophistication and effectiveness. The horse coordinated complex operations with subtle signals and careful consideration of each member's capabilities, maintaining security while fostering the development of their unique community. Under its guidance, the horses had established elaborate protocols for everything from security patrols to the integration of new arrivals, creating a sustainable and growing network of enhanced beings. As the sun set on another day in the hidden valley, Tom stood beside Shadow, watching the enhanced Mustangs move with practiced precision through their evening security routines. The horse that had collapsed in his field a year ago had led him to something extraordinary, a community of beings that represented the next step in the evolution of consciousness and intelligence. Chen's team had eventually abandoned their active search, though satellite surveillance continued sporadically. The Mustangs had proven too sophisticated, too adaptable to be recaptured. They had taken their enhanced capabilities and forged something entirely new, a society that combined the best of human tactical thinking with the natural wisdom of wild horses. Shadow pressed his nose gently against Tom's shoulder, their bond a testament to what was possible when trust and understanding bridged the gap between species. The horse's enhanced intelligence shone in his eyes as they surveyed their sanctuary together. Other Mustangs moved through the valley below, their coordinated movements a display of both power and precision. Tom thought about how far they'd come from that snowy morning when he'd found a sick horse in his field. What had started as a simple act of compassion had led to his involvement in something unprecedented, the evolution of a new form of consciousness in the wild. The enhanced Mustangs had created their own world, their own culture, their own way of life that transcended anything their creators had imagined possible. The black Mustang appeared on a ridge above, silhouetted against the evening sky, a symbol of freedom and intelligence that had evolved beyond any attempt to control or contain it. The horse's presence was a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries come from the simplest acts of kindness. If this story touched your heart and made you think about the incredible bonds possible between humans and animals, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Join our community to receive more inspiring stories about the remarkable connections that can develop when we open our hearts to the extraordinary beings who share our world. Together, we can celebrate and protect the wild spirit that lives in all of us.